Hello and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, hi, I'm Cassidy. If it's not, thanks for always tuning into my videos. Today we're doing part 2 of my audit series video thingy. There's part 1 and part 2, that's it. Today we are going over my dislikes in books. So we're looking at my stats for the last 5 years because that's what I have recorded on Goodreads, and we're going to look at the 1 and 2 star books and see what trends there are of things that I typically dislike in books so that in the future I cannot read some of these things and kind of weed them out so that more of my reads are 3, 4, and 5 stars. I should also say that I got this idea from Meg with Books. She did a 5-star audit, which is where I got the part 1 from this, and I just continued it into a 1-star, 2-star audit, least liked things audit in books. So let's just get right on into it. Let's start looking. There's actually one that's brand new that I'm currently reading, Shadow What Was Lost, at the time of filming this video, so it's not on my stats sheet, so I have no idea where it's gonna lie, but there is something that I've picked out from that book that I think I truly do not like in fantasy books. Now for this we will be looking at 2 and 1 stars, but I may pull in some points from 3-star reads, as 3-star is a more encompassing category. There are some 3 stars that I really liked, and then there's some 3 stars that were just like meh. So we're gonna look at both. But for this one, I think that something I really don't like in fantasy is essence-based magic systems. So I'm looking at you, Dragon Mage. Shadow What Was Lost is also one. There is an indie that I think I gave 3 stars to this year, The Soul's Aspect, which is essence-based, and I really didn't like the essence part in it. I became a bit of a savage with 1 and 2 stars. I've really honed in on what my rating system is this year, and so it is kind of why I'm pulling in 3 stars, because I think past years my 3s would have been 2s. Another one that I didn't like because of the essence magic system is Kingdom of Essence. This one is hard to explain to you, but specifically I find with essence-based magic systems, there's no consequences to your actions. There's no like hard limits on it. I find a lot of the times the magic system is constantly changing because it's just about what humans are capable of. It's just not a magic system that seems to work for me. I always am left with more questions, wanting to know more about how the magic works. I think it tends to be a magic system used with assumptions on how it's used and not definitive answers. And so it just doesn't work for me quite as much. It is something I've thought was cool, especially when it comes to like draining of essence, but it's something that just has not worked for me yet. I think the Nature of Witches would probably also be classified in this. I think they never use the term essence, but I think it's generally the same idea. It's something within you is used to make the magic. Lots of times there is like a reserve of essence, not always, but I do think that in Kingdom of Essence there's like a reserve. In Shadow of What Was Lost there's a reserve. In The Soul's Aspect there's a reserve, and in Dragon Mages there's like a reserve element, where in Nature of Witches it kind of borders the essence magic system for me and doesn't have as that category, that specific thing. I haven't read a lot of those books, but I think those are the only essence-based magic systems that I've read and really that I've read from, and I've not enjoyed any of them that much. Another one that's also a 3-star is Aragon, which borders on essence, but not really. It's more like magic-based, which Nature of Witches kind of is too, I guess. But when the term essence is used, it does not work for me. Other trends in fantasy, when I read Sabriel and Blackstone Heart, this is something I talked about with like a really isolated character. So in both Sabriel and Blackstone Heart, we're following one character with like 2 friends, and that's it, and we don't see like interactions with the outside world as much. It's typically a journey or a quest type story, and we're following that character and their friends, and so it just doesn't like expand very much. I think that that's something I dislike too, but let's see if there's a pattern. That's that way, that's that way. The Long Walk is also that way, but I did like The Long Walk. Actually, I quite enjoyed The Long Walk, one of the only Stephen King's I've enjoyed. Other than that, I don't really see it as a trend, but I actually think I'm still counting it because there's not a lot of stories in here that I've read that follow that pattern. I do think it's something that would turn me off of like think one character with just like a small close knit of friends doing something. And we just don't see a lot of interactions on outside characters. I think it tends... Oh, another one actually, I think that slightly follows that is The Wolf and the Woodsman. We do have a little bit of a larger broadening spectrum at the end of the book, but for most of the book we are following just like our two characters as they connect with each other. I'm specifically thinking of stories with like only like a couple characters. Like I said in my 5-star audit that I like isolated settings and I like multi-characters. So like not to go, these don't go against that. I like isolated characters that I like isolated settings that have like more characters to them. So something like No Exit where we have 5 or 6 characters and we're interacting with all 5 of those characters. What I dislike is an isolated character. So it's not that the setting is tiny, it's that we only spend time with like 2 characters the entire story versus we see a bunch of other characters, we see connections with other characters, we see developments. So, I mean, Aragon is actually kind of similar to this. We do actually spend most of the time with those 3 characters, but at least with Aragon we do get a little bit of outside sources. It feels less isolated than Sabriel does. Sabriel is literally, we hang out with like 2 characters, I think 3 in the end, pretty much the entire book, with like very little outside influence ever. Versus like Caro Haunt is an isolated setting, but like we have 6 characters that we are interacting with the entire time, even though it's a single POV'd story. So it's not about single POV versus multi-POV. I don't know if any of that makes sense. Oh, Comfort Me With Apples is another that's like very isolated in terms of like we're pretty much with our one character the entire time. We do have one scene where we see more of the neighborhood, but pretty much the entire book is in this girl's house in her head with just her. We barely even see her husband. And I didn't like that. I really don't think I like isolated character stories. I want a broadening of characters. I hope that made sense. What else do I dislike? This is harder. I think I might be only going for like 4 to 5 on this one because this is definitely a lot harder to pinpoint than favorites, actually. I thought this would be easier, but it's not. I'm trying to pinpoint what I didn't like in Black Sun because if you watched my 5-star audit, I talked about how like Black Sun is a book I should have loved. It clicks pretty much every box for something I love in a fantasy or just in books in general, but I hated it. It's like, what was it that I did not like? I think I was really just bored in it, and it might have been like the characters were flawed and the plot. Should I look at plot? Like, I do think I said in this, like, I just didn't felt like the plot developed enough, which could also deal with an isolated character. It could be a reason why I don't like them, is I want more than just your character. I want a plot driving factor, if that makes sense. So, like, I don't want really solely character-driven books. But I'm trying to think, are any of my 5 stars character-driven, like, solely character-driven with 0 plot? I don't think so. So I do think that's something that I dislike. I dislike, like, very character-heavy stories. Stories where we're hanging out with our characters, and that's pretty much the premise of the story. Things that don't... The plot doesn't... There's no, like, plot during that story. Sometimes there's an overarching... Sometimes I think there's an overarching plot for, like, the entire series, but that story might not have, like, a good enough plot. I think... Oh... Night of the Mannequins should have been an isolated character. I think Night of the Mannequins is a very isolated character. It's been so long since I read Fortuna, I forget. I think it's mostly character-driven. Like, the plot is to save her brother, but, like, that plot gets thrown out the window. I want to say Fortuna Sporn is, like, much more about the characters, and, like, there's no, like, driving force for the plot, really. People are probably going to come for me for this. This one's, like, really hard to, like, explain exactly what I mean. Think about a story where, like, here's the plot. By the end of the story, we've achieved the plot. This story is not that, if that makes sense. Or, like, we've at least gotten very close to the plot. Because, like, Black Sun's like that. There is a plot, but, like, there's no plot all at once. Sight Witch is kind of like that. It was the novella in the Witchland series, and it was more, like, information given to you. There wasn't very much plot. You had to like the characters. Wranglestone, it's a character zombie apocalypse book. Like, it's all about the characters. The plot in this is just makes no sense. Every Heart a Doorway does have a plot. Den of Vipers is literally about the characters. Devolution has a plot. So does An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. One by One has a plot. Final Girls also has a plot. Oh, The Midnight Library, no plot. Character driven. Completely. A Room with a View. I hated that book. I read it for school. Yes, I marked it as read. If we go back up to this year, The Goblin Emperor is another one that's very, like, intimate with your characters and not as much plot. I think I'm gonna count this, like, very, like, no plot is just what I'm putting it. Like, very character-driven stories. I've said it before, I'm a plot-driven reader, I'm not character-driven, although a book still needs to have strong characters for me, but if there's no plot, I'm just out. This is so much harder to find trends in. Maybe we should just do one more for the negative. If you're in the comments and you've seen, like, any trend that you think I have, let me know. This could be very thriller-y and very based on, like, Riley Sager, because it is something Riley Sager really likes to do. I don't like stories, I think, where something kind of comes out of left field at the end for, like, shock value. I think Lock Every Door with, like, its ending, it's like a gigantic twist. And it's not where the book was leading to in the first place. And a lot of people have problems with that twist ending, which is the same issue I think I had with The House Across the Lake. There's that twist ending that just, like, it's put in there just to be different, to get a reaction. It's not necessarily there because it's the right choice to make. City of Dusk also has some things added for just, like, plot experience, like, just to get the enjoyment out of you. Not the same thing, but Verity does have, like, a very heavy gimmick in it for me that I just dislike, which I think is kind of what I'm trying to go for, but most of the time it's, like, the end. If there's something in the ending of the book that's just, like, twist, if that makes sense. Oh yeah, Verity would be another one. It literally is another one that just has that, like, shock value twist at the end. Although you guys could all probably sit here and say with thrillers, like, the twist is very subjective, and I do agree with that. I think all of these books have that shock value twist. It's a twist that's there to, like, really separate readers. Either you loved it or hate it. It's not a twist that's there to, like, make sense, if that makes sense. Like, I love a twist that makes sense. Like, I think in The Death of Mrs. Westaway, there is a twist in it, but that twist makes sense. We're led to that conclusion. It's not just there for shock value. I think I don't like shock value twists, if that makes sense. I do actually think that Blood Witch does this in the Witchland series. Not Blood Witch. The latest release in the Witchland series does that shock value twist too, and it's something I disliked. What else has that, like, twist? I have less 1 or 2 stars than, like, favorites, so it's actually, like, really hard because I give a lot of books 4 stars. 3s and 4s are my highest. Yeah, you know what? I think that that's something I'm gonna, like, really classify. That twist, that shock value twist is just not something that works for me. It's very specific to, like, thriller horror, but as I said, I think City of Dusk does that, and it's a fantasy. You know what does do it? Is Into the Drowning Deep does do a shock value twist, but it's done so fast that, like, I feel like you barely have time to think about it, so that's why it didn't bother me, but it is a 4-star that does have that shock value twist. I'm trying to pinpoint one more thing. One more. Let's make it I was gonna say an even 5. That's not even, but, like, 5 is, like, a good number. But I don't know. A lot of these are ending books. Like, Warstorm, I hated the very last ending. Like, the last page. Is there, like, a type of character in these? I'm struggling now. Forget what I disliked about this book. An absolutely remarkable thing. Something I talk about is hope on my channel. Like, very, like, happy books. But, like, I actually don't think any of my 1 or 2 stars are really that happy. I don't think I can do a 5th one. Witch Shadow's the one I was thinking of, the new one. I do talk about, like, not really, like, liking urban fantasy, but again, I actually haven't, like, read that many urban fantasies and reviewed them badly. The thing with doing least favorites is some of these things that probably are a problem for me have just been weeded out already subconsciously. So, like, urban fantasy, I hated A Dark and Hollow Star for its urban fantasy, and it was very clear to me that I didn't like that. And since then, I've really avoided urban fantasy. It's just not something that works for me. So that, like, dislike trend has already been weeded out. It's the same with, like, The Wolf and the Woodsman is very, like, lore-based magic. It's just something I avoid because I know I just don't like it as much. I'll pick up the odd one that sounds like it could have that, like, it's like mythology fairy tale style. I could like it, but most of the time I'll DNF it if I really hate it, right? Like, these have to be books that I still pushed through in some way or the other, and I think that I just, like, I weed out a lot of those, which is a lot of why my 1 and 2 stars are, like, thriller and horrors, because a lot of time a thriller or horror dislike is more based on the ending and the overall story, where, like, fantasy, I also just like really know my taste, so a lot of that has been rooted out already. But for example, that like thriller thing I said about that like twist, that shock value twist, that's something I can't know without reading the book, unless it's like Lock Every Door, which has a lot of people talk about it. But I could be on the like side, I could be on the hate side technically, but I do think most of those shock value twists I'm just not a big fan of, as we saw on these stats. But yeah, I think with my dislikes, it's a lot harder because I've rooted a lot of these things out already. I'm just not reading them. So I think I'm gonna end this here. So thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end of this video and you'd like to leave me an emoji just to say you were here, leave me a sad emoji. Any emoji that is sad. Because we're sad that we don't like books sometimes. That's why. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you saw any trends, as I said, please let me know down below if you have any trends you think in my reading taste that I just dislike, that you've noticed over time. Comment it down below. If you'd like to connect with me on other platforms, my Bookstagram, my Book Twitter, and my Goodreads, and my Patreon are all linked in the description bar below. Have yourselves an absolutely remarkable day.